The afternoon was slowly falling over the city, and the last rays of sun filtered through the windows of an elegant downtown café. In this place, where the aroma of freshly ground coffee mixed with the conversations of those who thought themselves important, a woman went unnoticed. Her name was Clara. She was 38 years old, and she worked as a cleaning employee. She wore her spotless blue uniform, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, and her gaze, though tired, held a serenity that contrasted with the noise around her. To many, Clara did not exist. She was part of the furniture, a figure moving silently between tables full of other people's laughter and indifferent looks. But she had learned to observe. Every day, as she wiped the same shining marble, she saw stories repeat themselves. Couples feigning love, partners plotting deceit, and families arguing behind forced smiles. However, nothing she had seen before compared to the scene she was about to witness that day. At a back table, Matteo, a man in his mid-40s, wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit and a watch that shone like a trophy, spoke with impatience. His tone was low but charged with authority, the kind of authority often mistaken for arrogance. Across from him was his daughter, Alma, a 12-year-old girl with long, straight hair, held back by a white ribbon. She wore a light pink dress and small, barely noticeable hearing aids beneath the bright light. Her gaze was sweet, but it concealed a sadness that all her father's money could not hide. Matteo watched her with a frown, moving his lips impatiently. His words were a voiceless scolding for her. Alma tried to read them, but got lost between the movement of his mouth and her father's frustration. Each failed attempt was another wound on her heart. Clara, from the other end of the room, understood without hearing. There was something in that scene that moved her deeply. While pretending to clean an empty table, she couldn't take her eyes off that girl who struggled to understand a world that made no effort to understand her. The murmur of the room became a distant echo. Only three people existed: the arrogant man, the girl trapped in her silence, and her, the invisible woman who observed. Matteo's face tensed. He struck the table with an open palm, and the sound resonated like thunder. Some customers turned their heads, curious. Clara looked down, but her heart tightened. She knew that anger. It was the anger of someone who cannot accept that something escapes their control. Matteo couldn't stand not being understood, not even by his own daughter. At that instant, Alma lowered her head. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. With trembling hands, she made a slight gesture in the air, trying to sign something. Her father didn't understand. He responded with a harsh gesture, pointing at her hearing aids as if they were the problem. Clara felt an impulse, a force that wasn't curiosity or pity, but pure empathy. Her fingers moved on their own, making a simple, almost imperceptible gesture. Everything is fine. It was a small movement, but Alma saw it. Her eyes widened, surprised. For a second, the world ceased to be hostile. Clara returned to work without looking back, as if nothing had happened, but something had changed. Inside her, the echo of that gesture awakened a buried memory. She remembered the years she worked at a community center, teaching deaf children. She recalled the laughter, the gestures, the patience. She remembered how the language of the hands could be more honest than any word. When life became difficult, when she lost her mother and had to take any job to survive, she left all that behind. But now she understood that nothing had truly been lost. It had only been asleep, waiting for the moment to make sense again. Matteo called the waiter impatiently, demanding another coffee. He couldn't stand the silence he had created. Clara approached with her mop, her steps firm yet discreet. As she wiped the cloth near the table, she noticed Alma watching her. The girl smiled shyly, discreetly touching her ear and then her heart, as if thanking her. Clara nodded with a slight tilt of her head. Matteo didn't even notice the exchange. The atmosphere in the room felt different. What was an ordinary afternoon for everyone else became a starting point for the two of them. Clara understood that her silence was not resignation. It was strength, and that her invisibility somehow allowed her to see what others could not. When her shift ended, Clara put her things away in the small staff locker room. She looked at her hands and smiled. Sometimes, life speaks without words. Outside, the sun began to set behind the buildings. The city lights turned on, and Clara walked toward her home with a new feeling. She didn't know what awaited her, but she sensed that that girl in her gaze would cross paths with hers again. Because some encounters are not coincidences. They are silent calls that the soul recognizes before the mind. Part 2. The silent call night fell over the EUA city with the slow rhythm of a tired breath. In her small room, barely illuminated by a yellowish bulb, Clara carefully folded her uniform on a chair. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the sound of distant traffic and the ticking of a clock hanging on the wall. That day had been different. She had felt something she couldn't explain. A silent connection, a reminder of who she was before life pushed her into invisibility. Her room was modest, with worn ivory walls and a small window that let in the reflection of streetlights. On the table, a closed blue notebook lay covered in dust. Clara opened it carefully as if afraid to break the silence it held within. Between the pages, she found old notes written in tight handwriting, drawings of hands, symbols, and phrases in Mexican Sign Language. They were traces of a previous life, of a time when her world was not limited to the sound of dishes or the shine of freshly scrubbed floors. As she turned the pages, something within her breathed again. She remembered the classes at the community center, the children's laughter, the hands moving in the air as if painting invisible emotions. She remembered one girl in particular who had learned to sign thank you with her fingers, and how that gesture had been more eloquent than 1,000 words. But she also remembered the abrupt ending, her mother's illness, double shifts, the need for money, and then the routine. Day after day, the shine of the cloth, the smell of detergent, the fatigue accumulated in her bones, until her story became mute, just like the floors she cleaned. Clara looked up at the cracked mirror opposite the bed. Her reflection was not that of a defeated woman, but of someone beginning to wake up from a long sleep. She moved her hands in front of her face, trying to recall a simple gesture, first clumsy, then more fluid. Everything will be fine, she told herself without saying it. And for the first time in years, a sense of purpose returned to her chest. The next morning she returned to the café with a different energy. The place was the same, the aroma of coffee, the hurried customers, the same shine as always, but she saw it through different eyes. Her gaze searched, almost without wanting to, for the table from the day before. Empty. No Mateo. No Alma. She felt a slight disappointment, a void she didn't know how to fill. But fate rarely announces itself. Days passed, and that image didn't leave her. In every child who entered the premises, in every shy smile, she thought she saw Alma. Until one afternoon, the door opened, and she recognized her instantly. She wore the same pink dress but with a white jacket. Mateo walked behind her, checking his phone, indifferent to the surroundings. Clara watched them head to the same table as always. Her heart skipped a beat. Alma saw her. It wasn't a casual look, but an immediate recognition. The girl smiled with the same shyness as that first gesture. Clara, without thinking, made a small movement with her hands. "Hello," Alma replied. Brief, but sufficient. It was as if they had both been waiting for that moment. Mateo looked up for an instant, confused by his daughter's attention to the woman in the uniform. He frowned but said nothing. Clara continued cleaning as if nothing had happened, though her chest was pounding. She didn't need recognition. It was enough to know that this girl had found, for an instant at least, a space where her voice existed. That night, upon returning home, Clara returned to the mirror. She moved her hands, again, more confident, more precise. She was remembering everything she had forgotten. Each gesture returned something to her: dignity, memory, purpose. The woman the world didn't see was beginning to see herself, and yet something inside her told her that this was just beginning. That fate had brought these lives together for a reason she didn't yet understand. Perhaps, she thought, there are no casual encounters. only silent calls waiting to be answered. Part 3. The third day. The third day began with a different air in the cafe. There was something imperceptible, a sense of waiting, that floated among the usual sounds, the whistle of steam, the clash of cups, the murmur of conversations. Clara arrived early, in her spotless uniform and with a calm gaze. But inside her, something was stirring. It wasn't nervousness. It was a kind of intuition. She felt that this day she would cross paths again with the girl who had reminded her who she really was. She wasn't wrong. Mid-morning, the door swung open, and Mateo entered with a firm stride, like someone accustomed to the world stepping aside to let him pass. He wore his light gray suit, the shiny watch, and his usual controlled, cold, confident look. Behind him, Alma followed silently, carrying a small backpack that seemed heavy, more for its meaning than its contents. They chose the same back table. The routine repeated itself. Mateo gave orders with harsh gestures, the girl nodded silently, and the distance between them grew with every minute. Clara, from the other end of the room, pretended to focus on cleaning a display case, but her eyes were attentive, discreetly following them. She clearly remembered the shine of those childish eyes, the way a small smile had illuminated an entire afternoon. And she also remembered how, for a second, she had felt something akin to hope. Alma tried to speak to her father. She moved her hands slowly, carefully, as if afraid to make a mistake. Mateo looked at her without understanding. His patience easily broke, and the frown reappeared. He called the waiter, roughly, as if the problem were the world and not his own inability to listen. Clara took a deep breath. She knew she should maintain her role, invisible, functional, silent. But the heart does not understand hierarchy. As she wiped a nearby table, her hands began to move almost on their own. Simple gesture, discreet, barely visible to those who don't know how to look. But Alma saw it. It was an instant suspended in the air. The girl's eyes lit up, and the sadness that accompanied her transformed into surprise, then into shy joy. Her fingers responded with a short phrase in sign language. Thank you. Clara nodded without uttering a word. The exchange was so quick and silent that it went unnoticed by everyone, except Mateo. His gaze hardened as he noticed his daughter's attention toward the woman in the uniform. He turned his face toward the employee and observed her with disapproval. But Clara didn't flinch. Her expression remained calm, professional. She merely continued her work, while her mind reviewed every gesture, every signed word that was reawakening in her memory. The tension seized the atmosphere. Alma lowered her gaze, fearful of her father's reaction. Mateo refocused on his coffee, with that air of superiority possessed only by those who confuse respect with fear. However, something inside him stirred. Perhaps he didn't know it, but that silent exchange had opened a crack in his wall of pride. When they finished, Mateo left an exaggerated tip, just another way to display power, and left without looking back. But Alma, passing Clara, paused for a second. She moved her fingers with a subtle gesture. I'll see you. It was so quick that anyone would have thought she was just scratching her hand. Clara understood, and an inexplicable warmth ran through her chest. That night, upon returning home, she sat in front of the same mirror. Her hands moved smoothly. They were no longer timid gestures, but firm, precise ones. She was reclaiming a language that had never completely disappeared. While practicing, she remembered something. She had tried to forget the reason why she had left that job with deaf children. It wasn't just for money. It was fear. Fear of getting involved, of feeling too much, of being vulnerable. But now she understood that she couldn't escape her nature. Her gift wasn't a burden. It was her way of healing, even without knowing it. The woman who the world didn't see arrived early again the next day. The sun had not yet touched the windows, but the air already smelled of freshly brewed coffee. As she cleaned the tables, she looked toward the entrance, waiting without wanting to. And when the doors opened, there they were. Only this time something was different. Alma wasn't hiding behind her father. She walked a little taller, her eyes livelier. Mateo, although maintaining his usual demeanor, seemed tired, perhaps confused. There was something in the air, an energy that anticipated a new confrontation or perhaps a revelation. Clara took a deep breath, preparing herself without knowing what for. Sometimes, stories don't announce their climax. They simply push through, slowly, until life forces everyone to listen to what they previously chose to silence. And though she didn't know it yet, that morning would not be like the others, because the silence was about to become impossible to ignore. Part 4. The Unspoken Thanks. The cafe was busier than usual. It was Friday, and the murmur of conversations mixed with the sound of spoons hitting cups and the dense aroma of freshly ground coffee. But for Clara, the bustle was just a backdrop. Her attention was focused on that corner table, where Matteo distractedly thumbed through his phone while Alma drew in a small notebook. The midday light filtered through the windows, bathing the scene in a golden glow. There was something almost symbolic in the way that clarity fell upon the girl and her father, a border of light separating them. Clara moved the mop calmly, unhurriedly, while watching out of the corner of her eye. Her routine was the same, but inside her, nothing was. Since that first exchange in sign language, something had awakened within her. She no longer saw herself as a shadow in the place. Now every gesture carried weight, every look seemed to hold meaning. Alma, concentrated on her drawing, suddenly looked up and searched for Clara among the tables. When their eyes met, the girl discreetly raised a hand and made a quick gesture in signs. "Hello?" Clara barely smiled and responded with the same gesture. A brief, almost invisible exchange, but one that filled the air with unexpected warmth. Matteo noticed the movement and frowned. His discomfort transformed into a harsh look toward the woman in the uniform. With an authoritarian wave, he called the cafe manager. Clara stood still, waiting for the inevitable. There was a moment of tension, one of those that seemed to last longer than they should. Finally, the manager approached Clara and, with a kind but uncomfortable tone, asked her to take care of another section. She nodded silently and walked away without arguing. It wasn't necessary. She perfectly understood what was happening. She had seen these kinds of gestures all her life, those who order without speaking, those who humiliate without shouting. But Clara did not break. On the contrary, as she walked to the other end of the room, her mind filled with thoughts that needed no words. She knew what she had done was not wrong. She knew that girl had needed that gesture, and that no one, not even the most powerful father, could take away the truth of what she had felt. However, something unexpected happened. Minutes later, while Matteo was talking to the manager, Alma got up. She did it slowly, head bowed, holding her notebook with both hands. She walked to where Clara was cleaning the tables and stopped in front of her. The entire cafe seemed to fall silent. Clara leaned down a little, surprised. Alma held up the notebook and opened it. On one of the pages was a drawing, two hands making a greeting gesture, and underneath, written in pencil, "Thank you for seeing me." Clara felt a knot in her throat. She didn't need to say anything. Her eyes spoke for her. Carefully, she moved her hands in a slow, clear gesture. Always. It was then that Matteo realized. He stood up abruptly, his face tense, and walked toward them. The girl turned, scared. The manager watched from afar, unsure whether to intervene. Matteo stopped in front of Clara. His presence commanded respect, but his gaze was a mixture of anger and bewilderment. For an instant, he seemed to want to say something, but he didn't. He just looked at the notebook his daughter held, and then at the woman who had understood her without words. In that pause, something shifted. Matteo didn't know it yet, but that instant would mark the beginning of his transformation. His arrogance began to crack, and behind it appeared something he didn't remember feeling for a long time. Shame. Alma looked down, fearful of her father's reaction. Clara took a step back, respectfully. No one spoke. The silence grew denser, but it was not the same silence as before. This one had a voice, weight, meaning. When Matteo finally sat back down, he didn't look at his phone again. He just watched his daughter, motionless, as she clutched the notebook to her chest. Clara continued her work in silence, but a deep feeling accompanied her. It was not triumph or pride. It was something more serene, the certainty that she had done the right thing. That night, as the wind gently hit the window of her room, she thought about what had happened. She understood that true strength is not in words or visible actions, but in the ability to stand firm when no one else does. And although she didn't know it the next day, that silence which had spoken so clearly would do so again, but this time, in front of everyone. Part 5. The Cracking of Pride. Dawn arrived with a deceptive calm. The city woke up amidst the noise of engines and the smell of fresh bread, but in the café the air seemed denser, as if something was about to happen. Clara arrived punctually, in her impeccable uniform and her hair tied up as always. She greeted the manager, put her things away, and began her routine. However, her mind was still caught up in the scene from the day before, in that girl who had said "thank you" without using her voice. As she cleaned the counter, she thought about how such a small gesture had changed something within her. It wasn't just empathy, it was recognition. For the first time in a long time, someone had truly looked at her, not as a useful shadow, but as a person. But beyond that, Clara felt that her encounter with Alma had touched something profound, the need to communicate beyond the noise of the world. Mid-morning, the door to the establishment opened, and there they were again, Matteo and Alma. He entered with his usual arrogant presence, but his expression had a strange rigidity, as if something bothered him. The girl, on the other hand, walked with a different sparkle in her eyes. The place was full, and all the employees moved quickly to handle the demand. Clara, unintentionally, ended up near the table where they sat. She tried to keep her distance, but fate once again seemed determined not to let her escape this story. Alma opened her notebook and began to draw. Matteo, focused on his phone, didn't notice his daughter looking in Clara's direction. When their eyes met, the girl discreetly raised her hand and showed her a page with sign language symbols. Clara recognized the gestures immediately and responded with a soft movement. It was then that Matteo looked up. The moment froze. Their gazes crossed, power and humility face to face. Matteo seemed confused, even uncomfortable. He leaned slightly forward, watching how that woman, a simple cleaning employee, communicated with his daughter with a fluency he had never possessed. For an instant, Clara thought about stepping away, pretending nothing had happened. But she didn't. She couldn't keep hiding what she knew. It was her way of helping, her way of being present. Matteo watched her without saying a word. The arrogance that usually sustained him crumbled in silence. For the first time, he understood that the problem had never been his daughter, but himself. His pride, his inability to learn a language that was born not from the voice but from the heart. The murmur of the customers filled the background, but the scene between them had become the invisible center of the place. Clara continued moving her hands, slowly, teaching Alma a new gesture. The girl repeated it with a pure smile, happy to be understood. Some customers stopped to look, and unintentionally a different atmosphere enveloped the place. A warm silence, one of those that makes everyone lower their voices without knowing why. Matteo swallowed hard. He didn't fully understand what he was seeing, but he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Shame mixed with gratitude. His daughter, that girl he thought was broken, was communicating in front of him with someone who had neither wealth nor power, but the most valuable thing: empathy. Clara finished her task and walked away, leaving father and daughter alone. However, the scene remained alive. Matteo looked at Alma with a mixture of confusion and tenderness. She raised her hands and slowly made the same gesture she had learned a few minutes ago. "I love you." Matteo didn't understand the meaning, but something inside him was moved. Later, when her shift ended, Clara stepped out into the twilight with a feeling of peace. The sky was stained with orange and the wind caressed her face. She didn't need words to understand that something had changed that day, not only for the girl, but also for the man who had begun to listen without realizing it. That night, Looking out the window of her room, she thought about how strange fate is, how life can bring completely opposite people together to teach each other. What Clara didn't know was that, the next day, the millionaire who never looked anyone in the eye would seek her out again. And this time, not to reprimand her, but to thank her. Part 6. A New Language of the Heart. The day dawned cloudy, as if the sky knew something important was about to happen. In the cafe, the atmosphere was different. Quieter, almost solemn. Employees worked in silence. Customers spoke in hushed tones, and even the aroma of coffee seemed softer. It was a calm that precedes the moments that mark a before and after. Clara arrived as always, punctual, in her blue uniform and her hair pulled back. She greeted the manager with a faint smile, put away her things, and began her routine. However, her mind was still trapped in the scene from the day before, in that girl who had said thank you without using her voice. As she cleaned the counter, she thought about how such a small gesture had changed something within her. It wasn't just empathy, but recognition. For the first time in a long time, someone had truly seen her, not as a helpful shadow, but as a person. But beyond that, Clara felt that her encounter with Alma had touched something profound, the need to communicate beyond the world's noise. Shortly after noon, the door opened. Matteo entered alone. He didn't have his phone in. His hand bore the same haughty expression as always. His face, usually tense, was tired, and his eyes, which once sought control, now seemed to seek answers. Clara saw him from the back, surprised. For a second, she thought something bad had happened. But then she saw him approach step by step with a different calmness, as if for the first time he was willing to listen. When he reached the bar, he stopped in front of her. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her. Clara looked down, nervous, but maintained her composure. Matteo took a deep breath, and with a sincere gesture, he extended his hand. It was not a theatrical gesture, but a human one. There was no pride, no superiority, only gratitude. "Thank you," he said in a low, almost broken voice. Clara understood before hearing him. She nodded with a calm smile, took his hand, and held it for an instant. There was nothing more to say. In that handshake were summarized all the words he didn't know how to say and that she didn't need to hear. Then a figure appeared behind him. Alma. The girl was carrying a new notebook, with colorful drawings and large letters. She ran toward Clara and hugged her without hesitation. The woman stood motionless for an instant, surprised, and then returned the embrace tenderly. Matteo watched the scene in silence, his eyes moist. Perhaps for the first time in years he understood something essential. His daughter had never been silent. It was he who had not wanted to learn to listen. Alma pulled away and moved her hands gently, forming words in the air. Clara smiled, repeating the same gestures. Matteo watched attentively, trying to understand. Alma looked at him and repeated the movements more slowly. "What is she saying?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Clara made a gesture with her lips and hands. "I forgive you." The man broke inside. Time seemed to stand still. All the noise in the place disappeared, and in its place was only the sound of his ragged breathing, the weight of his pride falling like a stone to the ground. He brought a hand to his face, trying to contain the tears, but he couldn't. Clara stood firm, without condescension, without drama. She was just there, present, like a silent bridge between two souls finally meeting. After a few seconds, Matteo approached, and in a strained voice said, "Could you teach me?" Clara looked at him in surprise, and, without answering, she raised a hand, forming the sign for yes. Alma applauded enthusiastically, and the sound of her hands clapping was like a small, everyday miracle, a promise of change. That afternoon, the cafe witnessed something that could not be bought, forced, or feigned. 3 people, separated by the noise of the world, were finally united through the purest language, the one born from the heart. As night fell, Clara left the premises and walked under a light drizzle. She felt the fresh air on her face, her hands warm, and a peace she hadn't known for a long time. She didn't need words. She knew that in some way she had closed one cycle and opened another. Life had given her back her voice, not in sound, but in meaning. As she walked away, the echo of the city enveloped her. It wasn't noise. It was music, the kind that is only heard when one learns to quiet the inside.